There's a tradition in the park where I work. Until recently, I didn't quite understand it. It felt like some sort of initiation, like a prank saved for the newest ranger. Our park is extensive. It's the kind you need to dedicate a whole weekend to if you truly want a taste of what the woods have to offer. There's more beauty out here than you could possibly see in a single day. I guess there's ugliness out here too. When I first started, I was assigned to the night shift. The other guy seemed eager to leave that post behind. I figured it was because of the unusual hours. That wasn't exactly the case. I'd begin my nights by clocking in and settling into a small security office. My job mainly was watching cameras, tidying up after the day's visitors, and assessing any projects that might need to be done the following day. Plus, of course, the tradition. When they briefed me about the chicken, I thought it was a prank. Then I arrived for my first shift, and sure enough, there was a whole skinned chicken waiting on my desk, wrapped in plastic, left by a member of the day crew. They told me I'd need to carry it into the woods following a specific trail before unwrapping it and placing the meat down on an old tree stump. Then I'd go back to work as usual. The first night I chuckled and did as instructed. I wasn't going to let their little initiation rite get to me. I played along, barely concerned with my duties or my surroundings. Then the chicken was there on the second night. But the joke seemed old by then, I thought. Just seeing another whole chicken on my desk made me groan. I was annoyed. How long were they planning to keep it up? I took it out the second night as well. This time I was too irritable to brush off the world around me. Following the marked trail, I realized something. The woods were different at night. I'd done all of my interviews and training during daylight hours. Out there, when the sun was down, the forest was eerily quiet. When the wind blew and the leaves rustled, it sounded more like a growling stomach than a whispering breeze. The sound made my skin crawl. So I placed the chicken on the stump, and that night I hurried back. Night 3 was when I made my mistake. I didn't want to venture into those woods again, not with enough raw meat in my hands to make me feel like bait. I discarded the offering in the dumpster instead. The rest of the crew wouldn't know either way, would they? Not until I was long gone for the day. They could scold me for skipping their little tradition all they wanted. But it wasn't the park rangers who came looking for me. It was something else. I saw it on the cameras first. It looked like a dog ran past the parking lot feed. I stared at the camera for a while after the blurry shape disappeared, but the dog didn't return. I heard a scrambling outside the security booth and locked the door to the outside. It was a raccoon or an opossum, I was sure, but a chill was creeping up my neck anyway. I focused on the cameras. Then the dog came back. It was at the dumpster, sniffing around the edge. It must have come searching for its offering. Only no ordinary dog could have grasped that concept, right? A typical dog would have stayed near the tree stump, waiting for its master to add food to its bowl. It wouldn't have come searching, not like this. Then again, it wasn't an average dog on the cameras. It was massive. It was twice the size of any mastiff I'd ever seen. If it hadn't been walking on all fours, using its nose to track down its meal, I would have thought I was witnessing something else entirely. I would have called it a bear or a lion of some sort, but its head was unmistakably canine. And even if its patchy physique reminded me of a man's in some spots, I couldn't imagine it was anything but a hound. A huge, deformed hound of some sort. Its twisted back and human-like shoulders had to be a mutation, right? In those ways, it was different enough from a dog to make me question. It was enough to spread that chill further through my body. When the creature turned from the dumpster, I felt an icy grip on my heart. It felt like I was watching a monster emerge from beneath the bed. It was creeping its way toward the security booth, evidently unsatisfied with the idea of sniffing the scent of chicken all night. It wanted something more, I knew it. It wanted to find a bigger meal, since the easy one was no longer an option. I waited and prepared myself for the creature to come knocking, banging, or scratching against the door. When it never did, I breathed a sigh of relief. I sat wrapped in my dread until the sun rose and the next park ranger arrived to take over my duty. When he saw my expression, he only shook his head. He already knew, I suppose, that I'd neglected to place the chicken where it belonged. He patted my shoulder and suggested I take the next night off, that the former night ranger would be resuming his duties. I did as instructed. After a cautious phone call, I was moved to work during daylight hours. I never did return after dark, but the tradition still requires my assistance at times. Once or twice a month, at the end of my shift, I'm leaving a chicken on that poor park ranger's desk. I've been listening for a couple of weeks now, and it has made me want to write in with my own experience. After this situation happened, I really tried to put it behind me. I really didn't want to dwell on it too much. I want to be watchful and have common sense and all, but if I spent too much mental energy on that, I might never go outside. When I was in my 20s, I was on a camping trip with a couple of my friends in Central Florida. 2 of us were rangers for the National Park Service at the time. That gave us the privilege of camping for free in other parks in the state. We had all done a lot of camping before. I grew up camping with my family on almost all our vacations in one form or another. We had camped all over the state of Florida and were very familiar with the environment. On this trip, we were camping in the youth area since it was empty that week. It was quieter and more isolated than the regular campsites. The first day, we just spent our time reading and relaxing and so on. Some of the rangers on duty came by to chat with us. When you work for the Park Service, you tend to acquire a lot of wild stories to tell. We hung out for a while, and then me and my 2 friends got busy with our dinner prep and such. It was a quiet night. The second day in the afternoon, we were all sort of spread out in the area of the campsite. We were all within shouting distance of each other, but also enjoying a little solitude. I was collecting firewood. Every now and then I kind of started feeling like something was watching me, but it wasn't overly uncomfortable, just a strange sensation. I'd look around, but I wouldn't see or hear anything, so I'd shrug it off and go back to what I was doing. Later on, around sunset, we had the bonfire started. One of the rangers who lived on site about a quarter mile away came over with a truckload of firewood and some fish he had caught. We all sat around talking and grilling our food. After dark, when it was around 9 o'clock in the evening, we started hearing what sounded like a bunch of people messing around on one of the trails a little distance away. Since the trails were supposed to be closed at sunset, the ranger and my coworker drove off to shoo them back to their campsites. My other friend and I were just relaxing around the fire, talking a little, mostly enjoying the night and the peace and quiet. All of a sudden, I had a cold chill go over me, like someone had just walked over my grave. I was covered with goosebumps. I just started feeling terrified out of nowhere. I tried to ignore it, but it kept building. I didn't want to say anything to my friend in order not to scare her. But then we both looked over at each other at the same time. She said, "Do you feel that?" I said, "Yeah, I think maybe we better go to the car." We both felt like we were in danger, but we had no idea from what. We started walking at a casual pace, not wanting to appear scared. We only made it about 10 yards before I felt something staring at me from behind and to the right. Immediately, all my senses went on red alert as I quieted my breathing so that I could listen into the foliage. I could hear a shifting of the environment just beyond the edge of the path. It was subtle, but I could tell by the sound that whatever it was sounded large. My heart started beating faster, but I tried to tell myself I was being too paranoid. I was thinking it might be a boar, or God forbid, a Florida panther, which are rare, but people still see them occasionally. I could feel the energy moving behind me. I felt like we were being stalked, and I pressed my hand on the fixed blade I had hanging from my belt. I risked a look behind me and saw something pale and thin just off the edge of the path. It was crouched down on all fours. Even in the hunched down position, it was still huge, at least 6 feet long. It was almost totally white without many facial features, except it stared at us with black eyes and an open mouth. It seemed crusty and dry. When I looked at it, it started making a clicking sound. We were about 15 yards from the car when my friend and I looked at each other again and simultaneously broke into a dead run. We reached the car, jumped in and locked the doors and turned on the headlights. My pistol was in the car, and I sat there holding it, but my hands were shaking so badly. We both just sat looking straight ahead. I don't know how long we sat there, but at one point we both were sure we saw something slinking away. It was like we could actually feel that energy pulling away. I called the ranger and tried to describe what we had seen. He could tell by the sound of my voice that I was seriously messed up. I have never been that scared before or since. I have faced a lot in my life, wandered around the woods and all, and nothing has so completely terrified me like that. I don't know what it was, but I'm still convinced we were in danger. We did end up sleeping on the ranger's living room floor that night and collected our gear the next day. Around 5 years ago, I made up my mind to volunteer for a cleanup job at Yellowstone National Park. My old man always hammered into me the importance of responsibilities beyond our daily grind, like taking care of the environment. Despite being a plumber by trade, I had a soft spot for nature. The park always exuded tranquility, and I aimed to keep it that way, pure and tidy. That particular day started like any other brisk fall morning with the scent of fallen leaves lingering in the air. A sizable crowd turned up for the event, scattered across the park armed with litter grabbers and sturdy bags. The labor was exhausting but gratifying. Whenever I took a breather, I relished the breathtaking vistas of Yellowstone. Then things took a turn. First, the ground rumbled violently, sending all the birds into a frenzy. I remember spinning around, my heart pounding like crazy. A peculiar atmosphere hung in the air. Abruptly, silence descended, but not the serene kind. The odor that followed was nauseating, a blend of earth, decaying garbage, and a hint of sulfur. I'd encountered my fair share of foul odors on the job, but this one was on another level. And what transpired next? Well, it defied explanation. I heard an odd sound, akin to a radio tuning, accompanied by a blinding light. Then something indistinct in the dim glow crashed through the trees, causing chaos. My initial thought was, damn, a plane just went down. Yet the object's form and its peculiar movements didn't add up. I struggled to discern the figure moving in the distant dimness. It resembled a scene from a movie. All I could discern was its somber hue and an overwhelming intensity. I was pretty spooked. But as I stood there, the object began to shrink until it reached human proportions. Then something else happened. I heard a voice, though unlike any ordinary voice. It felt as though it resonated within my mind. Someone spoke in a language beyond my comprehension. Everything blurred, with trees and sky swirling around me. A pounding headache gripped me, and the last thing I glimpsed was a pair of ominous black eyes before everything went black. I came to in a park ranger station. Other volunteers found me unconscious, sprawled out in the open. They chalked it up to exhaustion from overexertion, but deep down I sensed there was more to it, something I couldn't quite grasp. Things only grew stranger from there. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity, but was determined to locate where the object had landed. I clung to the hope that it was merely a satellite or perhaps a drone. Thus, the following day, I ventured back to the same area. I reassured myself with thoughts of a rational explanation as I traversed the forest. Upon reaching a clearing, I spotted the object that had plummeted from the sky the day before. And let me tell you, it resembled some sort of spacecraft, its metallic surface rippling like liquid. A low, steady hum emanated from it, causing the forest floor to tremble slightly. As I drew closer, I noticed a scorched trail left in the shrubbery upon its descent. Discarded wrappers and a flattened water bottle littered the ground, likely remnants from our cleanup endeavor. The stench was overpowering, making me feel queasy. A throbbing headache set in, synchronized with the hum. I edged closer, and that's when I saw them. The Greys. They materialized seemingly out of thin air, emerging from the craft. They stood shorter than me, frail, with oversized heads adorned with peculiar black eyes. I couldn't tear my gaze away from them. I don't recall seeing a nose or mouth, just a smooth expanse where their facial features should be. Their gray skin had a glossy sheen, reminiscent of river-polished stones. As I observed, I heard it, within my mind. Numerous voices conversing, unintelligible yet unmistakably present. Dizziness overwhelmed me, as if the world around me spun wildly. I felt dreadful, as though I'd stumbled into a predator's clutches. I collapsed, witnessing these beings interact with the spacecraft. One of them glanced at me, and I swear he uttered in English, "Continue onward." After that, everything went blank. Darkness enveloped me. When I attempted to recount my experience, people met me with awkward silences and dismissive shrugs. Some even laughed. A lot. Weeks later, they still joked about my ordeal. Despite the passage of time, I remained steadfast in my account. I'm convinced it was real, not a figment of my imagination. Sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I catch a whiff of that foul odor. I simply wish for my story to resonate with someone who's undergone a similar ordeal. I'm not seeking validation, but I refuse to bear this burden alone. There are countless mysteries in this world that elude our understanding. I'm this history enthusiast who loves browsing libraries and garage sales, searching for interesting items. While my friends were planning a trip to Vegas, I opted for Pennsylvania instead. I ended up choosing Gettysburg National Military Park over Vegas. This all happened back in the summer of 2018, and there I was in Gettysburg with my khaki shorts, big hat, and backpack filled with treasures. I was pretty prepared for this visit, even memorized some lines from Lincoln's address. But let me tell you, walking around that place was an unforgettable experience. It felt like I was walking through a time machine. Just a regular day, until the tour guide started bringing the place to life. He knew everything about every corner of the park. The guy could spin a pretty remarkable tale about all the remarkable events that occurred there. After satisfying our hunger, the last stop was at this ghostly hotspot. Some people claimed they'd seen apparitions there, but we thought it was unlikely. Turns out our guide was quite dramatic. It was a typical July day, not too hot, not too cold. We climbed a little hill and stopped by this solitary tree. You could tell it had been there for ages. There was a moment of tranquility before our guide began pointing out some old mark on the tree. He said it was hit by a stray bullet during a war skirmish. He considered it a violent symbol, a piece of history. As we were conversing and taking photos, I noticed a solitary figure standing there. It felt peculiar, like encountering a specter from the past. Then some unexpected events unfolded. Suddenly, I caught a scent of tobacco and damp earth. I glanced at this solitary figure again, and it appeared more vivid and larger. However, I was the only one who could see it. I was about to investigate when everything eerily quieted down. The chatter of the group, the crunch of leaves, the chirping of birds, all disappeared. A cold breeze swept through, and I started trembling. Out of nowhere, the park became eerily silent. My heart began pounding, echoing in my ears. Gradually, I discerned a figure in the distance. Our guide got us moving again, snapping me out of my trance. Whatever or whoever I saw had vanished and everything returned to normal. Did I just witness a real-life flashback or something? Guess I'll soon find out. Glanced back and nearly lost it. Figure appearing out of nowhere, resembling a worn-out soldier, phantom-like and sorrowful, eyes hollow. He was translucent, like a strange heat-wave illusion. I blinked, now more curious than scared. This spectral soldier, illuminated by the sunset, saluted me. The battlefield still smelled of dirt and stale tobacco. The ghost remained silent but floated there, merely gazing at me with his vacant eyes. Suddenly it grew colder, and the scent of damp earth intensified. Was this soldier trying to communicate with me? I wanted to approach him, but it felt like my legs were rooted to the ground. When I saw the intensity in his eyes, I was stunned. What was with his piercing gaze and overwhelming emotions? It was messing with my head. Felt like I was in an old-fashioned movie, kind of intriguing but unsettling. Suddenly, our guide resumed talking, snapping me back to reality. I blinked, and just like that, it was as if nothing had happened. The usual sounds of the park returned, people chatting, leaves rustling, birds chirping. Still feeling a bit shaken, I rejoined the group. Just witnessed something inexplicable. Even in the sunlight, I still felt shivers. Being around other tourists didn't alleviate my thoughts, couldn't shake off the experience for the remainder of my time at Gettysburg. Suddenly, everything felt tangible, yet surreal. I've always had an interest in history, but that day, it felt like history was reaching out to me. Was it a ghostly soldier seeking acknowledgement, or was I just craving excitement in life? I felt special yet unsettled at the same time. The place I called home wasn't your usual suburban house or modern city apartment. Nope, my home was a rustic cabin nestled deep within the heart of the Florida Everglades. I was far away from the noise and distractions of city life. The cabin itself wasn't anything fancy, but to me it was a fortress of solitude, a retreat where I could lose myself listening to the wind and the sounds of nature. The Everglades is a special region of subtropical wilderness. It's a vast landscape in southern Florida filled with lush greenery, murky waters, and diverse wildlife. This marshy wonderland stretches as far as you can see, with towering cypress trees standing as ancient guardians over the swamp. The swamp was a big part of my life. It was my backyard, my fishing pond, my slice of wild heaven. Nearby, the winding waterways teemed with all sorts of wildlife. Alligators soaked up the sun, herons hunted in the shallows, and now and then a deer would stop by for a drink. As someone who loved nature, this vibrant ecosystem was always fascinating and calming to me. But on that bone-chilling night in September, this seemingly perfect paradise, this sanctuary that I had made my home, turned into a hunting ground. Just as midnight was closing in, the noise of the swamp fell strangely silent. The crickets stopped chirping, and the frogs stopped croaking. I was sitting on my porch enjoying the night when I noticed a strange movement in the water. It was an odd disturbance, not like the usual rhythm of the swamp. I got up from my creaky wooden rocking chair and squinted into the moonlit marsh. My heart was pounding with unease. Something was disrupting the water's flow and creating ripples that seemed out of place. Emerging from the murky depths, a figure began to take shape, confirming my fears. It was a huge figure, monstrous and towering in the moonlight. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, a height that sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't a creature that belonged in the Florida Everglades, or anywhere on Earth for that matter. Its eyes grabbed my attention next. They were a sickly yellow, the color of decay. They glowed in the darkness like fiery coals, radiating an intense, evil light that chilled me to the bone. As I looked at its face, I realized it resembled something out of a horror movie. It was reptilian, resembling an alligator or a crocodile. But what was most disturbing was that this monster stood upright on 2 legs, defying nature's design. The creature moved awkwardly but purposefully, heading towards me with heavy footsteps that squelched in the swampy mud. I could hardly breathe as I stood there, frozen in fear and disbelief. On my humble porch in the heart of the Everglades, I was face to face with a nightmare brought to life. It was a terrifying moment, turning my sanctuary into a horror scene. The sight was horrifying. Thankfully, my legs worked and I dashed inside my cabin, securing every window and door. I even barricaded the doors with furniture in hopes of keeping the creature out. I spent the night huddled in a corner, listening to the creature scratch against the wood, its growls echoing through the rooms. As dawn broke, the chilling sounds faded, leaving me in the silence of my violated home. The days after the encounter were a blur. I left my beloved home and returned to civilization in a way I never expected. I moved in with my sister for a while, spending many months there before I could gather the courage to return. Life hasn't been the same since that encounter. The wilderness that once brought me peace has become a source of unending terror. For I know what lurks within the depths of the Everglades, an abomination of nature, a creature of nightmares forever etched into my memory. This individual, Ed, claims he was followed by this remarkably intelligent large creature in the Pennsylvania National Forest. Definitely not a bear or something. He reached out to me with this extraordinary story from 2018 when he was hiking in the Susquehannock National Forest with his longtime best friend. So, Ed here says he's a hardcore nature enthusiast and practically lives on hiking trails. Guy's even got first aid training. He's hiked all over the place with a goal to do at least 100 miles every year. They hit the trail around 10 in the morning, with the weather being pretty great. They're hiking through this really thick forest, quite literally in the middle of nowhere. Ed's feeling a bit spooked, but doesn't want to alarm his buddy. After about an hour of trudging, they hit this small open spot on top of a hill with a killer view. As he's taking it all in, Ed spots some big shadowy thing moving around in the bushes like 50 yards off. At first they figured it was a dog, but it was way bigger than they'd first thought, which left them seriously confused. Trying to get a better look was tough with all the bush around. What they could see, though, was pretty big, and they started thinking it might be a huge black bear. Then, out of nowhere, the thing seemed to stand up on its hind legs. They could still only get quick looks at it through the forest brush. They saw it glide through the bush super easily. Soon, Ed and his bud caught a disconcerting vibe. They felt like they were being watched. It hit them real fast. They were on someone's lunch menu. Ed said he got goosebumps even though they couldn't see anything. Ed and his friend knew they had to leave, but they were scared witless. They panicked, thinking something might jump on them any second. Bracing themselves, they decided to leave. As they were moving, they heard some serious noises from the bushes on both sides. Ed even heard some eerie, heavy breathing, kind of reminded him of his chain smoker grandma. And the sound of snapping trees, whatever was tailing them had to be really huge. They started panicking, thinking this might be a black bear, which was strange because bears don't hunt in groups. Plus, the heavy breathing definitely sounded like something big. They bolted when they realized they were being followed. The eerie silence meant some top-tier predator was on their tail. The whole way back, it felt like this thing, maybe a bear, was chasing them off its turf. After encountering Bigfoot, Ed made sure his buddy was okay. He didn't want to share the whole story because he was worried about being ridiculed. Ed's certain they encountered Bigfoot, even though it sounds absurd. This place is peculiar, like UFO and other anomalous sightings kind of peculiar. Ed says, if it was a bear, then the way it acted in the woods didn't add up at all. They say animals either show up or leave when humans are around, but all you hear are sounds of their movement and breath. Some folks swear they've spotted this abnormally tall, carnivorous creature hanging out in a Pennsylvania forest. Maybe that's what they encountered that day. Don't know if we can officially count this as an encounter, though. So black bears are usually the go-to explanation for Bigfoot sightings. But if Ed and his mate mistook a bear for a big dog, how can we explain other large critters stalking them in the woods? Just a random event. Ed agreed that though he first doubted it was Bigfoot, a few things made him sure it wasn't a bear either. The eerie silence, the sense of being chased away from their turf, just didn't fit the usual bear behavior. Truth can be stranger than any fabricated tale.